Hello and welcome to Tata Literature Live, the 11th annual Mumbai International Literature Festival and the first one to be completely digital, co-sponsored by Tata Steel and Tata Projects. A headline we're unfortunately very used to reading goes something like this. A woman was kidnapped from below her office building and taken to a remote location where she was repeatedly raped. What if it went something like this? A man kidnapped a woman, drove her to a remote location, and repeatedly sexually assaulted her. Puts the blame squarely where it belongs, doesn't it? In this session, Rape and the Role of Media, our speakers will talk about how the media should report on this all too prevalent crime without inadvertently promoting it. Our panelists are Sameera Khan is a researcher, journalist, and co-author of the book, Why Loiter? Women and Risk on Mumbai Streets. Tara Kaushal writes extensively on gender, sexuality, rights, and socio-cultural issues. Her book, Why Men Rape, an Indian Undercover Investigation, is available on our website for purchase at tatalitlive.in. Vakasha Sachdev is an associate editor, legal, at the Quint. His suggested amendments to the law on stalking in India have been adopted by the Delhi Legislative Assembly. George Jose will chair the session. He is visiting associate professor of anthropology at NYU, Abu Dhabi. He was also dean of the Jyoti Dalal School of Liberal Arts, NMIS, Mumbai. Over to you, George.
Thank you very much, Suruchi, welcome to this particular panel on rape and the role of the media. It's a wonderful panel I have here in front of me, and welcome to all of you. The way I thought we could structure this particular conversation is by getting each of the panelists to actually make an opening statement about how they perceive the role of the media. And we will use that particular initial statement to weave a conversation around the role of the media and the reportage of rape today. So may I turn to Tara Kaushal as our opening speaker. Tara, you know, the role of the media has really come under an increasing spotlight recently. In many ways, there's a continuing conversation about objectivity. There's a continuing conversation about partisan reporting, and then there's, of course, the question about sensitivity. How do you see the challenges in front of the media as far as reporting rape is concerned?
Thanks, George, and thank you all, everyone, for being here. I'm going to start, George, with actually criticizing the media and discussing things as they are today. In the penetrating book Arushi, Aviruk Sen writes about the role of the media in the Arushi Talwar, Hemraj Banjade murder cases in 2008. Those were the boom years for the Indian media. The number of news channels had suddenly multiplied and everyone was chasing market share. The easiest route was sensationalism. A dozen years later, things are infinitely worse. There are more news sources than ever before. Simultaneously, consumer attention and therefore advertising revenue is spread thinner than ever before, wooed by Facebook and Pornhub and WhatsApp and the works, right? So news anchors and headlines alike scream louder and resort to more extraordinary sensationalism than ever before to guard our attention and to be heard above the din. Now the thing is, such sensationalism and such episodic coverage has consequences. When we seek quick and easy solutions to complex problems, that is exactly what we get. And the media tends to fuel this frenzy, to fuel the bloodlust, with Beti Khatre Mein Hai and justice for Asifa and arrest the rapists and hang the culprits, and now everything has to happen now. Now I'm quite critical of a scenario where important cases are being investigated under this kind of public scrutiny. It is unfortunate, but I must say that the Indian law enforcement is incompetent at best and corrupt at worst. So when they have consequences of having their such media scrutiny on their actions include things like scapegoating. And what we recently saw happen with Riya Chakravarti in the Sushant Singh Rajput murder case. So the news does not respect rules of sub judice, does not respect, innocent until proven guilty. And this is the environment that we're in, which condoned and even celebrated, but I actually think allowed the Telangana accused to be killed in that extrajudicial manner. So what tends to happen is the Twitterverse is happy. We've played judge, jury, and executioner for the day, but nothing really changes, and we go back to in an environment where women are getting raped and murdered every single day. And what also happens with such episodic news coverage is a documented phenomena called contagion. Now, contagion has been studied across the world, where whether it's gun violence or whether it's suicide. When you have something that grabs headlines, it will lead to copycat crimes. And we see that right after the Hathras gang rape, something similar happened again in UP. And we do see this all the time. So I think our media is at fault and is actually causing some of the rape crisis that we have in India today.
Thank you, Tara. I think that was a fairly strong opening statement. Let me take that to Sameera, because in many ways, Sameera, you've been a long-time observer of the Indian media, first as a reporter and now as a teacher, training our next generation of journalists. How much has the distinction between mainstream media and social media, the distinctions between broadcast and print, the difference between digital and analog, how has this contributed to the new challenges we are facing in terms of reporting responsibly?
Okay. Thank you very much for having me on this panel. Thank you for the question, George. Let me lay it out first. I think it's important we're considering this subject. The Global Media Monitoring Project, which is a media survey which looks at women's presence and absence in news stories, in its last two surveys, 2010 and 2015, found that women across the world are underrepresented in news stories. In India, the survey found that across all news subject categories, if you look at politics, economy, women constitute only about 21% of the news subjects, except on one category, and that one category is violent crime. In that one category, women constitute more than 40% of the news subjects. We've clearly seen in India an increased interest in the media to report on violent crimes against women, specifically rape, definitely since the 2012 gang rape murder of Jyoti Singh, and the public outcry which followed it, and the changes in the laws which followed it. But clearly the media needs to pay much more attention to the quality of that coverage and the challenges brought about by that. So typically when you look at media coverage of rape, you have a couple of characteristics. One is the media gets very caught up in following one incident or individual and not looking at the structures at play, whether they be patriarchy or caste or class or sexuality that foment such crimes. And when you were talking about what is the difference between, say, digital, print, whatever, I think the 24/7 news cycle has really contributed to this because there's this urge every hour to update your news, or maybe actually every minute. It used to be broadcast every hour, but with social media and digital, it's every minute. So you want one little more fragment of news. It doesn't work in stories which are violent crimes and rape, because it means the other thing which you can violate issues of violate privacy and identification of the survivor and her family. So that is another characteristic we see clearly of the media, constantly doing that. But they, while they do that with regard to the survivor, they don't do that so much. They give a bigger leeway to the perpetrators. The other thing, of course, is that constantly there's a class and caste bias playing out, which determines which stories get covered and which victims and which stories get play. So clearly, survivors and victims who get really covered are middle-class women. When crimes happen in the body of the middle-class woman, when they're working-class women, tribals, Dalit women, those stories are more hidden, or unless civil society raises a debate about it. Also, where the story is located, so in an urban setting or a rural setting or a tribal village. Clearly, the stories in the urban settings get much more play. Which perpetrators are covered by the media? Poor working-class men, when they commit a rape or a sexual assault, that definitely gets the media's attention, and they go hammer and tongs at those perpetrators. But perpetrators who are well off or powerful, their crimes can get easily hidden up. The media often doesn't concentrate on them. Then, of course, there's this whole tone of moralizing, and which is used to shame the survivor, from everything to the time she was out, to what she wore, who she was out with. And there's a lot of discussion on this, in academic circles as well as in the media. So I want to point out that there are many more characters like this of media coverage of rape, but currently, particularly with the Hathras case, we are seeing some very important challenges that the media is now facing coverage of such crimes. Now, the Hathras gang rape case actually got covered 2 weeks too late, because when the crime happened, for 2 weeks there was no coverage of this young Valmiki Dalit girl gang raped by upper caste men and left in a very brutal condition. So she goes to hospital in Aligarh, then in Delhi. Then when she dies, there's some media attention paid. When her body is taken to a village, the media attention is paid. And then it turns into a media spectacle with differing media narratives. We have different media houses taking different stands, particularly certain broadcast networks, which are hinting at conspiracies among journalists and whatever. And eventually, what happens to the narrative? It's forgotten, really. So what is also disturbing to note here is that the whole attempt to control information and frame the counter-narrative by the state's role, the UP government's role in this, basically they're discouraging independent reportage. When journalists go to cover cases, the UAPA, like to this journalist from Kerala who went, they are sort of arrested under UAPA and sedition law to go and report the case. They're locking up the bereaved family. They're filing cases, against people who want information on that case. So there's this complete state lockdown on news with regard to gang rape. Then, of course, they're conditioned that don't call it a rape. It's not a rape. Then don't bring in caste, because then you're fomenting caste upheaval. So they're setting the counter narrative. The state also goes as far as to hire a professional PR agency to counter that media narrative and give another alternative false narrative. And so this is a very important challenge for media, because I think it's happened before. The state has done this, but with regard to a rape case, I think it's interesting how other issues are at play, other politics, who is UP ruled by, what is the opposition, all those kind of things. So there's a lot of pressure not to report on the caste angle in this case. This is also a case in many other cases. For example, in Kerala, I'm going to talk, there's also a rising trend of, not just Kerala, but elsewhere, but there's an example from Kerala of a very powerful men seeking gag orders and filing defamation suits against media companies in order to attempt them not to report sexual assault and harassment. And they're filing these under the same legal provisions that are intended to safeguard identity and privacy of survivors in a society which tends to shame women for such a crime. And this is with regard to a very well-known case in Kerala, and where the alleged perpetrators are seeking these gag orders against everyone. And these are very important stories the media is pointing out. Media is pointing out that there are attempts to intimidate and silence witnesses. This is what the media is talking about, but using this law against the media, these cases are being filed. So there's really important things happening that is not just now about gang rape, about the family and the perpetrators. There are many more other politics at play, and the media getting caught in that. So there's an issue of the crisis, how the media is reporting it, but also media is being gagged in some ways.
No, great. I mean, I think, Sameera, you've raised a bunch of issues there. I think the question about whether media itself is involved in setting up a motivated narrative, whether there's a certain kind of ideological tinge already that permeates the way media approaches its job. Those are kind of critical issues. The question about the role of the state, or indeed the role of the media in terms of what we used to talk about in terms of speaking truths to power, for instance. I think there's a range of issues there that I want to come back to you in our later rounds to pick up on. But let me just turn to Vakasha at this point. Vakasha, the relationship between the media and the legal institution in our country has never been without tension. There's been the question about whether the courts are really looking at the media as, in some sense, an institution that they can work along with, or whether the media becomes, as Sameera seems to suggest, also there is the potential of it becoming a kangaroo court, a parallel kind of sense of justice that Tara also referred to in her opening statement, right? What do you see as the relationship between legal institutions and the media?
So just before I begin, I just want to make one very, very brief point, which is that I think this whole situation where a particular panel at this fest was called off involving certain authors was a slightly disturbing thing. I just want to place on record my personal opposition to what happened there and the fact that the Chomsky panel was taken off. But moving on now to the discussion, I want to make it clear, and the reason why I actually kind of did that, and I'm going to mention this here, is that there is a need for us to do a lot more introspection a lot of the time, where as the media, as public figures, as anyone having these kind of conversations, because the failure to introspect is what leads to the perpetuation of a lot of problems. Now, I will personally, for instance, I will say that I would disagree with a particular point where Tara said that she thinks that the media is causing a lot of the rape here. I mean, I completely see where she's going with that and why she's saying that, and I mostly agree, in fact, with that sentiment. But there is a reason why I slightly will object to that, and I want to get into that later in the conversation. But why I'm saying this is because the question of introspection is what comes up most when we're looking at the intersection of law and the media when it comes to this. Because what happens when it comes to media reporting on all of this, the reason why you have so much sensationalism, the reason why you have a complete disregard for privacy, you have a complete disregard for respecting the identity of the victim, keeping all of these things are done because there's no real understanding in the media why these things are being done. It's something as simple as that. I think both Tara and Sameera have mentioned the Asifa situation, the Kathua gang rape and murder. Now, what happened in that case was that every news organization, and this was not just the fringe, the random social media crazies, this was newspapers. The Economic Times had a whole editorial, in fact, on this, justifying why you should name the victim, why you should show her face. Now, the problem was, none of them seemed to understand that whatever your moral stance may be on this, there is, first of all, a very clear law in place, which was the POCSO Act, which prevented any such reporting on it. There is Section 228A of the Indian Penal Code. Now, the problem is the only reason why they were able, none of the media organizations were really thinking through why these restrictions are there. They just thought, oh, maybe it's there in the law, but maybe we can get around it. Many of them didn't even know that it was there. When the Delhi High Court hauled them up for this, there were news organizations saying, we didn't know this was a provision of the law. I mean, this was like, I think if this was for like proper newspapers and TV channels going to the High Court and saying, we didn't know we're not allowed to do this. And the fact that that is there, that there can be media organizations which don't even know what the law is problem number one. Those who did know had no understanding why it was there. And that, I think, it comes right back to why we have this sensationalist reporting, because if you're not understanding why you need to be sensitive, how are you going to ever think about being more careful? If you don't understand what the reason behind a legal provision is, we saw, for instance, this happen again with Hathras, where there was this talk, oh, it's not a gang rape because the FSL report found no semen in it. Now, again, the law specifically does not require the FSL report to determine whether there is a case of rape or not. So why? So media houses which were just reporting what this SP was saying or what this policeman was saying was absolutely ridiculous. There had to be a fact check alongside it. Most news organizations didn't do that. Or explaining the context behind why, it's not like there's legal and there's even scientific stuff here. That if your FSL report swabs are taken 2 weeks after the incident has happened, you're not going to find anything. But even before, but the scientific one is where you're admitting the fact that this is still a relevant issue. It never was a relevant issue. And that was a requirement to understand why we have a concept of rape right now, which exists, which doesn't even require full penetration. It doesn't require ejaculation. It doesn't require any of those things for it to be rape. But the media houses who were just casually reporting what was being said evidently didn't understand that. And I think that is our biggest problem right now, is that if there was a bit of understanding, or there was some introspection to understand why these rules are in place, why these concerns are raised, that will automatically mean that even though there is a massive incentivization to sensationalize, there's a massive incentivization to tell all the most lurid aspects of a story, you will at least have some more introspection and prevention of it from going as out of hand as it is. But the fact that the media fails to do this every single time, and I think that's what Sameera's point was great, was that there is no big picture analysis. You just run after the news which has happened, and then before you know, then there's another one, and then before you know, there's another one, and you have to keep tracking those particular news events rather than being able to talk about the big picture issues. So I think these are the things which I really like to kind of explore here over the course of this discussion, is that, and I understand obviously you had specifically asked me about legal institutions, but this comes back to it because as we saw with the Delhi High Court's interactions with the media, the failure to have an understanding of the law, the failure to have an understanding of what this means, that there's a complete disconnect between what our legal institutions are doing, and especially what they're supposed to be doing, and what the media seems to think is required when it comes to a case like this.
Thank you, Vakasha. What is striking to my mind is already a kind of an emerging consensus among the three of you about the so to speak, the limits within which the media is functioning at the moment. And in a sense, it's more than a little ironical, Vakasha, that you refer to Chomsky, because in a certain way, Chomsky is probably beginning to emerge as quite relevant for our conversation here. Right? I mean,
yeah.
given that manifesto, and
sorry.
One of sorry, Tara.
I fell off. Sorry.
No, I think the idea, Tara. Let me come back to you because and pick on this particular term you use to characterize the media, which is that you suggested that the reporting is episodic, and in many ways, it is that failure to connect the dots. Or as Vakasha put it, the failure to kind of invest in the big picture. That seems to be one of the kind of key accusations, if you will, that you're making against the media. Now, what produces this context for the making of episodic reporting, and how are we going to address that particular situation?
Okay, so I think your question and my response to Vakasha's disagreement with what I was saying are going to be kind of connected. So one of the things that we need to pay attention to is the difference in language. Now, language not only determines how we look at the media and in what language we consume the media, but it has also divided India quite considerably. So what we consume in the English media is very different from what is consumed in Hindi and other regional medias. Now, this is one element. The second element that I want to bring out is the difference between written and TV coverage, or whatever, video coverage. I say TV, but now I mean WhatsApp University and the works. Now, it is tempting to believe that because the English language media caters to urban, educated people who are at least comfortably speaking English, it is tempting to believe that the Indian language, the English media is better than the rest. Now, I don't entirely agree. I'm sorry, my cat is doing cat things behind me, but it's fine, I guess. Now, it's tempting for us to believe that this is true, that, the English media has the opportunity to learn from in English as a language. English has moved towards egalitarian language. We're talking about the right pronouns and what is acceptable words and what are not acceptable words. But this is not entirely true. And in one particular situation, the English language media actually does a greater disservice than others, which is that in order to cater only to its urban educated audience and urban audience, and it then brings to the fore stories that only resonate with this audience. And in that sense, you will have a limited interest in all of these gang rapes that are happening all over the country. And this is something that, somebody I spoke to during the course of researching my book said to me. He said the only thing unique about the Delhi gang rape was that it happened in Delhi to a Delhi girl. Indian women are raped and murdered in villages all the time, and the English media never covers these stories. So in that sense, the English media tends to pander to global elitist power structures, rich over poor, rural, urban, English, non-English, all of these power structures that inherently exist in any case. And of course, when we talk about in the English media not reporting anything but the most super sensational cases that come out of rural India, we are certainly talking about the fact that then they are ignoring 88% of reported rapes, because 88% of reported rapes come out of rural India. Now, as far as the quality of the English media is concerned, just saying that Arnab is our most popular English news anchor is enough. It is enough said. It says all that needs to be said. But the English media and other media also has a problem with a good woman, bad woman binary, and also good men versus bad men. We don't, by using words like monster and darinda and hevan and shaitan, we are not allowing for the fact that men, respectable men from good families also rape. And we see this in the coverage of Me Too. So many people, so much news coverage refused to believe that someone like Alok Nath would even do these things, because he had this sanskari image, and it's pretty much the same as we see the world over. So even when you look at the Delhi gang rape, okay, it was after the word rare, the most commonly used adjectives for the Delhi gang rape in the English media were brutal, diabolical, and heinous. Now, we know it wasn't rare. It was only rare because it was Delhi. It was only there because it happened to a Brahmin girl in Delhi. It was not a rare case. And in fact, if you look at then if you look at capital punishment, which should then happen only for the rarest of the rare, was the Delhi gang rape the rarest of the rare? I hate to say that it wasn't. It wasn't. We just, as media consumers, it was rare for us. What also happens with sensationalism is that, and this is why one of the reasons I say that the media causes rape. What happens with sensationalism is that it adds to the confusion about what is consent. If the Delhi gang rape and murder, which is 4 Shakti Kapoor type men, the stereotype of, monsters, other monsters lurking in the bushes, waiting for some Savarna virgin to come along. If that is rape, then it's certainly not a little coercion. It's certainly not what is done by a husband to a wife on the night of a forced arranged marriage. It's certainly not a little slapping. It's certainly not marital rape. So it adds to the confusion of what is rape and what is consent. And also then has the fatigue of hearing about these increasingly graphic things. Has it, deadened our palates to the more mundane, to the penises in our backsides in public transport, or a little flashing or whatever? Has it deadened our palates even as regular consumers? And for the police as well.
Right.
So I do think that such episodic and sensational coverage and yellow journalism has consequences.
Tara, that's I think a range of concerns that you've raised. Let me just take that to Sameera. Sameera, in a sense, one of the things that Tara is implying there is that there's a certain commodification of the news cycle. That in many ways we now have a reading audience who, in a sense, are leading the way, so to speak. So there is, in a sense, therefore, a playing to the gallery. There is a sense of give the audience what it wants. That seems to inform the decisions that are taken within the newsroom. If that is the case, how do we begin to maintain this distinction between social media, as you referred to in your earlier statement, and what we still insist is a publisher's responsibility? How do we make that distinction, and how do we introduce that feature of responsibility that begins to again inform the way news is reported?
Yeah, I agree with Tara, this thing about how violent a particular crime is. The definition for the media has become that we will cover that in depth, depending on the level of how brutal it is, how violent it is. Have iron rods been used? Have it been pushed to your private parts? And that becomes the criteria of that is rape, and that is rape we cover, as opposed to all other kinds of microaggressions or anything falling short of that is, well, itna damage nahi hua tha. I mean, it's not such a big rape story. It's amazing how newsrooms they actually say this is not a big story, big rape story versus small rape story, because you look at what is this is become problematic, and this episodic coverage is you choose these episodes, you choose certain kind of episodes based on violence, based on where the location is, based on pandering to a certain kind of audience who wants to know. But in pandering to the audience who wants to know, when we talk to young women about when they're seeing coverage of a rape, are you getting information? You need to arm yourselves maybe in some ways or inform you. They don't, because they say all we're getting is fear-mongering. It's telling us, in fact, that kind of reportage of breathless tone is policing our movements much more. So we are actually nervous ourselves reading it, but we don't want our family members reading it, because then it's not that one girl who got raped. We all, in a way, paid the price for it, because all our movements get policed in the way it is reported by the media. That's a real big responsibility. So suddenly you're saying, oh, okay, they reported it like this, and so now my movements are policed every day. So there's a real responsibility of the media of not just for that case where justice should be sought and the justice wheels should take over, but also knowing that you're also responsible giving, and information can be given different ways. For example, in the case of the Shakti Mills case in 2013, the OB vans of the TV companies were outside Jaslok Hospital for a week. They were standing there waiting for the one soundbite every day from the doctor reporting. But after the first, second day, when you knew that the survivor was getting treatment, the FIR had been filed, the story moves to other instances. The story moves away. You don't sit and wait there and get little pieces of information every day. There are many other stories like this. There were many other stories related to that you could do. For example, the law had just changed. That was one of the first cases being tried under the new law, changes after the Verma committee. But you didn't see, for example, that the magistrate can now come to the rape survivor and take a statement. The rape survivor doesn't have to go. You can go to a private hospital and get treatment. She could walk into a private hospital and not a public hospital and demand attention, and would be given. Because there were new protocols hospitals had to follow following the changes in the Criminal Procedure Act in May 2013, just 2 months before that. Now, if you want to inform your reader, that is the information you give them. When we talk to young women, I want to know, how did she land up with Jaslok? How did she manage to get treatment? That is what I want to know. Why are you not telling me about these more important changes in law which actually affect my ability to use the law or feel empowered in some way? But it's always, so instead some journalist lands up at the building where this person stays and asks the watchman, did she walk her dog or whatever? I don't know. What relevance does this have to the story? So this intrusion, like it's literally the journalist is lost after day one. The breaking story is fine. You're putting pressure on the cop to file a FIR and eventually to file a charge sheet. But after that, you lost your way. You think it's just this one story. Rape is systemic. It's all around us. All kinds of people. Look at it from different angles. So widen your lens. And as I have to say, what he said about, Vakasha said about understanding law, up to 100%, I'm with you on this. You need to, if you are reporting these cases, you need to know the law. You need to know what the law is or medical evidence. Now, everything has changed. Lots of issues have changed, but somehow journalists are stuck in that the cops are going to answer these questions. Instead of you arming yourselves with information, so you can ask the cop better questions, like why are they waiting for this FSL report? Why is it 2 weeks late? What's the point? Someone has already had a bath or a shower. Anyway, it doesn't hold up in court. That's not important. There's so many other aspects of the investigation where you can put pressure, but somehow you've forgotten your role. It is sensational. You see people but they keep defending it because I train journalists that people want to know. Yeah, but this is not what people want to know more and more. They want to know much more other things. The other thing I wanted to point out, like she talked about, Tara talked about, in rural India, a lot of this crime takes place, but we focus on the urban, is similarly, we keep focusing, the media focuses sexual assault and danger in public space. And that's an area which I have studied, but not enough on private violence. It's almost like strangers in public place and women. If you put those things together, that is the predominance of the crimes. But the National Crime Records Bureau statistics show us clearly that it's private violence in this country and domestic violence, which is the biggest cause of violence to women. So you need to you don't talk about that. At one time, we talked about dowry victims, gas cylinders going off, and now the new ways of killing them. Dowry exists, dowry murders exist, but we don't, and the statistics bear us out on that, but we don't report that. So private violence is suddenly hidden, and women are told, in fact, to stay home. And the public is presented to them as this dangerous place. So that all this, your reporting is so flawed, like where you're putting your lens, what you need to focus on. So you can tell stories. Often when I train media people, they think that, oh, you're telling us not to tell the story. No, there are stories to tell. But what are the stories you're choosing to put your lens on, and what needs attention is something else.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I'm quite mindful of time at the moment. And so let me just quickly go to Vakasha and try and pick up on what he had said earlier about, and what Sameera you've just referred to, about the absence of a certain understanding of the law among journalists itself. And Vakasha, I was wondering whether, when you look at the newspapers today, then there's obviously a fairly significant rise in the number of opinion pieces, let us say, as compared to reportage. So in many ways, indeed, as much as our panel itself represents really a kind of a platform for opinions, has media become more of a place to mold perception, place to jostle among various ideological positions, as opposed to reporting on the ground, as opposed to asking tough questions and knowing how to train journalists in order to ask the tough questions? And if that is not happening, and if media becomes really an extension of social media in terms of a range of opinions, would that have consequences for many of the things that Tara and Sameera have highlighted?
No, absolutely. And that's why I said, I mean, even though I said I sort of slightly disagree with Tara's wording on that, the reason why I mostly agree with that is precisely this. I think the issue is basically that what we have with the media is that your very basic idea of what needs to be done when a particular event happens is what is being done these days. So the idea, it's the way they treat rape cases, the way they treat these kind of issues, is that it's just another news event. And that itself leads to the problems, because I think what we have, it's this classic issue which the media has to deal with, is that you have to decide whether you're going to just be putting out a basic question of fact, or what is the larger role you're going to play. And the funny thing is that while you'd think having more opinion pieces, more this kind of stuff would mean that you're actually gearing to us, that actually you're not, because it's not introspective again. It's not really thinking about what really should be the role here. You're only saying, oh, someone here has got an opinion, let's put that opinion there. And oh, now because someone has a different opinion, let's put that opinion there. Opinion making is one of the biggest problems, I think, right now, which we have. And it's an interesting thing, because in a newsroom itself, we have to struggle with this at times, because at some level, the pure news cycle will demand that you have to go for okay, this is just basically what happened, and here's what this one said, and here's what that one said. I think the issue is, and this is where I would agree, that what the media can do is what we really have to look at here. And I'll pick up what happened back with the Mathura case and with the 2013 case to a certain extent as good examples of showing us actually all sides of what happens here. With Mathura, for instance, initially the news coverage wasn't good. It was pretty bad. I think Pamela Philpose has written about it and spoken about how bad it was because of, again, you had male-heavy newsrooms. They didn't really understand what was going on. For them, they were just, again, looking at it as an event and we'll report on it. They didn't think of the big picture. But what happened was, as more and more of the women's social, and there's a great story in 52.in this week on this, was about the women's social movements, which really built up to fighting about this narrative. And that was how you had that open letter written to the Supreme Court. The thing was, eventually the media realized that that's what they had to cover. It was less about the fighting over just what happened in the case and what's going on with the next case, which seems to be similar. It was, how do we build taking that narrative forward? And I think that's something which the media really, really needs to start doing right now, is looking at saying that, yes, we have to do a bunch of things. One, focus more again on proper reportage of these incidents, which is why a Hathras case shouldn't come out 2 weeks later. It should have come out earlier itself. The reporting processes within the news organization should have meant that we got to know about that case earlier itself. And the moment that the basic information about that came, a lot of triggers should have been going on in the heads of newsrooms. It should have been, one, there's a caste angle here. This needs to be explored further. We have to analyze this from that lens. Two, look at the fact that this is again a case where a young woman is being brutalized by a large group of people. The kind of effects of what this is meant to do to not just her, but other women in that community. This sort of thought process, which has to be triggered in the background, is what is not happening. And there's no thought behind that in the media at this point, because everyone's just running after either TRPs for the television, or you're running after page views when it comes to digital. And that's an issue which we face. Having said that, even one can't say that we're at the mercy of that. We have the power to make that narrative better. And that's where I think, so what has to be done is there has to be an understanding that you will not get the views for some of these articles. You will not get the things for some of it. And there has to be a conscious decision to say that we will still therefore do all the other news which will get you this, but we will also make sure that we are doing this side of it. Because if you do that and you're able to then identify what are the real things where you can drive this conversation forward, then there is change. Mathura, the coverage did lead to change. 2013 did lead to change, even though, of course, the problem was because of that very hysterical way in which that was done, which came again because there was a lack of understanding of the law, a lack of understanding of due process within, which is why so much of the 2013 coverage was, oh my God, we must now have capital punishment, without realizing how many women's social groups didn't want that in the first place. Yeah. Nobody is going to actually tell you that is going to be the solution, because it's not. And the thing was, this is actually a bigger picture problem which we have in India, which the media, again, if they learn to understand the law, will understand that, is why do you have a process? Why do you have innocent before proven guilty? Why do you need to go through all of that? And right now, the problem is in India, we have a very problematic idea of what justice is. And again, that's a place where the media have to play a role to come into this. Now, as I said, I think until and unless we have an introspection about how important these issues are, with being able to understand, and I think that's where maybe what Tara said is actually important. We need a wake-up call like that, where the media feels, yes, you're being blamed for this. And rightly so. I mean, while I personally feel you can't say they're a cause, but they're very much part of the problem. You're part of this whole idea of how we look at sexual violence, how we look at solutions to sexual violence, which is completely wrong and completely misses what the real issues are. So that's, I think, so, the more conversations we have like this, I think the better, because that is because if the media does start to do that introspection, they can achieve things. And it is something which is so important for being able to drive these kind of movements, to drive this kind of conversation. So, which is why I love the fact that, we've had this panel with two women here who have worked on this, who know what they're talking about, who are able to kind of really bring forward these opinions which people in the media really need to hear.
Thank you. Thank you, Vakasha. We are almost completely out of time. I have just about a minute But I very, quickly, Vakasha, thanks for really highlighting the role of social movements in trying to kind of create a strengthening environment for the media to play a specific kind of role. Very quickly to Tara and Sameera, let me go back to you for your final concluding kind of statements. I was wondering if I could ask you, given that today public trust in the media seems to be at an all-time low. There is a sense that the media is already partisan. There is a sense that the media has already taken sides. There is a sense that the media is not interested in the truth. There is in fact even a kind of undermining of the value of truth itself in our lives and in our worlds. So in this context, how do you see the media respond to the challenges that you've outlined?
Sameera, you want to?
Yeah, I know it's not a very good picture, but I don't want to say it's so hopeless. I train a lot of young journalists, men and women, and who are very enthusiastic and they want to get this story right. So I think there are changes. I do regular training on the issue, and there's a lot of openness now. And I have to say, the openness really came after 2012. I noticed that there was much more people reaching out for that kind of training and understanding issues on women in public space, women in safety and violence, but also rape and law and coverage of that. So there is a lot of interest among young media practitioners. So let's not dismiss them all, not throw the baby with the bathwater out. But yes, I think media institutions and corporations need to understand that you need much more training. It's I think the intention of many journalists is not they want justice. I'm not saying everybody's sold out and everybody's sold. But the point is they go about it all wrong. It's almost like they don't know. So it's fine, but then ask for help. There's lots of resources available today, internationally and in India. So there are lots of resources available for that and to help you do better coverage, not just on rape, but so many other issues. And I think that they need to ask that. I'm glad you talked about the women's groups with Mathura, but I think that civil society and that women's movement pressure is needed. We need to interact with the right experts in the women's movement who can, alert us about that, tell us about that, what are the new changes in thinking with regard to that. So I think civil society pressure is important on media. We hopefully we won't lose that. Over to Tara.
Thank you. Tara, I'm sorry, we are not able to hear you.
Muted.
Oh gosh,
Yeah,
this has been happening.
Yeah, now we can.
Okay. I also think we need more grants. The media needs more support. Because if our only business model is advertiser and therefore TRP driven, and you're then constantly, it becomes a vicious cycle. There is a direct correlation between editorial and advertising and sales, and then sales and your political stance, and we see this. And we know that a lot of media houses tend to be partisan, not only to political masters, but just to the money. And so we need a lot more grants. We need a lot more, funded media that sees media in the role that it is supposed to have. We are the fourth pillar of democracy. And we should be allowed to function in a non-partisan environment, not constantly looking at the figures and the bottom line.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tara. I think you've really highlighted the absolutely central role for independent media and what our collective responsibility would be to make that happen and to create the conditions to support independent media. Yeah. Now we are completely out of time. Vakasha, I know that you were just wanting to come in so quickly for under half a minute.
Yeah, I just think I'm going to just come back to this because I think, look, we've got to hear from people like Sameera and Tara on the bigger picture gender issues here, on the bigger picture issues which have to be there from those other perspectives. From my own view, because as I said, I just realized that, having seen the way the law can be used in this way to understand this and drive that more intelligent coverage, that's just something which I really hope we can emphasize more. It's not easy, and I think it's a bit hard, but one of the things is this is a place where digital media can really step up actually, because you have some sort of alternative revenue models. Yes, clicks are important, but you can get clicks on a serious considered issue as well. It's not just about having an absolutely new event. And I think we have to therefore start really looking at leveraging all the sort of strengths of different parts of the media to really drive this going forward. So digital can look at being able to do the more long form, thoughtful piece. TV has to make sure that you get the news out there, which makes people realize you can't ignore this. Print needs to make sure that all those details are done in a very careful manner so that nobody is lacking information to be able to then take the conversation forward. And I think for all of these organizations, then having that understanding of why there is a law, and not just what the law is, but also what the law should be, which is where conversations with legal experts and social groups again becomes important, is because that is how you will be able to understand really where to go forward with this, because those social groups are the ones who really understand when they're proposing, say, amendments to the law, they're saying it from a sociological perspective, which is what we have to bring to how we approach this issue as a whole. And if we fail to do this holistic approach to it, I think is why we will keep having this same kind of useless coverage, which really doesn't get us very far. I mean, it does over a long term maybe achieve some things, but it always is flawed, and it's always helping to make the problem worse rather than fixing it as it really should be.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to all the panelists. I think we really were able to keep to time, and now we have given ourselves a bit of time for the Q&A. So for those of you who are listening in, it would be great if you have questions to send them right in, and I would be able to pose it to our panelists. Some questions have already begun coming in, and so without really taking a break, let me try and pose those questions to the specific panelists. So Vakasha, let me start with you, Vakasha. There is a question here from Arun, who says, in the time of social media and fake news, what is the responsibility of the media, specifically print, but also other media, in relation to reporting the news?
I think being able to set out context and do fact checks where required is now an absolute essential. There was a time when maybe you could say that, okay, I will just do my bit. I will say that this is the news, this is what's important. And if someone else messes it up, I'm not going to bother with that. Whereas now the media has to be aware about the potential for how even a basic simple sentence in a line is going to be taken. I think, as I said, I'm going back to that example from Hathras where you had the SP making that statement about, FSL report. That is the absolutely perfect moment for us to understand what the media needs to do now. Because when we look at it, people who just did straight news reporting, that was immediately picked up by social media. It was picked up by all the weirdos in the world. It was picked up as a political narrative. Then to say, oh, look, this is all just being created. It's nonsensical. There is no rape. Just because one guy has said one sentence. Now, that is why the reporter then has to at that point say, I am going to say what this guy said, but I have to put this line underneath explaining this is not what the law says. This is not what scientifically matters. This is not what is relevant. It's that classic thing of saying that, right? That when you have someone says that it's raining outside, someone says it's not raining outside, the journalist's job is not to say, oh, someone said each thing. They're supposed to look outside the goddamn window and take a look and see what is happening. And that's the point here, which is more and more important in today's day and age with that social media angle coming in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thanks. Sameera, let me put the second question to you. It is from Ramesh Jain. And he asks, if it weren't for the media coverage of the gang rape of Jyoti Singh, there may not indeed have been a movement. Did the media not help in playing a constructive role here?
Actually, I think it's the reverse. I think it was a social movement, the public pressure, young people on the streets of Delhi, and not so young people on the streets of Delhi, who took on water guns thrown at them by Sheila Dikshit's government. The government didn't answer questions. I mean, a woman chief minister didn't do anything. They closed down the metro station closest to the protest site, close to India Gate. But yet people landed up. They landed up and said that we will not take it anymore. So I have to say that the media story then changed from just Jyoti saying that was one story, but they were also following the second story of people reacting to that. So I think it's not just the media staged the story. They were clever. They saw that the story had now become bigger. So I think actually civil society action is very important, and the media needs to support civil society action. Women's groups, human rights groups, we need those. Those are the groups which are being shut up now, and media needs to work with them or listen to them or hear those voices. So they really set the agenda. I think the people in the streets of Delhi did that, and people in other cities of India which followed. So that was the media followed the story, not that the other way around.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question, let me put it to Tara. Tara, it's from Neema Madhavan, and she asks, she observes that India is seen as the rape capital of the world. Is the media to blame for this dubious distinction, or is there some truth to it?
Well, whenever I'm asked about to compare rape stats between India and other countries, I can't. We're comparing apples to oranges because the definition of what rape is varies across countries. But also we have absolutely, if we're only going by reporting, we also know today that 99.1% of rapes, if they involve the current spouse, are not reported to the police. This is in India. And 85% of rapes, if they don't involve the current spouse, are not reported to the police. So it's impossible to compare stats. It's impossible to compare stats even between India, stats of India today versus India 5 years ago, because we don't have them. And we can only compare reported rape stats, which are irrelevant, and so are convicted rape cases, again an irrelevant statistic. So I don't really have an answer about this, but I do know that we do have a problem. And I know that a lot of rape apologists end up saying things like, oh, it's because India has a protest culture and that there's a lot more rape in Africa and gang rape in Africa, but it never gets protested, so no one knows. I don't think then that we cannot, that we should not look at a protest culture. We should protest because one rape is a rape too many. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to take away from the fact that the media has to report what's going on. We need to put the onus back on men, and men in India in this case, to reduce rape and maybe remove that tag that we currently have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And there is actually a question, Tara, again directed to you from Janak Zaveri, who asks, did you come across any false cases of rape in your research for the book?
Okay, so I'm done with this false rape complaint conversation. Every time I have a conversation about rape, every single one, there is false rape complaints, men too, not all men. These are standard. And now I have many things to say about that, including the fact that, of course, I just told you, 99.1% of cases are not reported. Also, the data journalist Rukmini Srinivasan actually looked at rape complaints in Delhi. And what she found was that about 30% of them were filed by parents attempting to break up inter-religion marriages. Relationships, sorry, inter-religion relationships. Now that is not rape. That is the abuse of the law. And these men are never convicted, which is part of the reason our rape conviction stands at 24%. But I think the more important scenario that we need to talk about is the actual rapes, and not focus and not find false equivalence with this false rape complaint narrative.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Tara. Vakasha, let me take this question to you. For gender-related issues, information relating to laws and its processes are rarely visible in the media. What can the media's role be in informing the public about these laws?
So I think one thing which we, for instance, done at the Quit Now is we have a dedicated law section. I think other places are also starting to do that. I think that's a good start. have sections where you are explaining, where you're not just putting out the basic news event, you have further analysis, you have FAQs, you have materials which can be used to understand things going forward. One of the interesting things, especially in the legal front, has been the rise of things like live law and bar and bench. They've actually done a really good job in putting out, the actual information there for people to see. And that's, really helping, I think, drive a bit more understanding and that we all need to know more about the law. And I think, therefore, this is a great opportunity for all media houses to have dedicated sections on this, have regular explainers, have descriptions of even concepts like why, like, for instance, criminal justice, the different theories of deterrent theory versus retributive, have people understand that, because that's how you then understand that, for instance, death penalty is not going to work, or that this is not going to happen. So this requires, I think, a very long-term sort of, a slightly longer-term approach to all of this, because the materials are all there. There is a lot of expertise out there which can really help with that. I think it's just a matter of will at this point, really, that we can do that and we need to start.
Yeah, we are almost
I think
towards the end.
Sameera was just trying to.
Yes.
Just want to add one more quick thing. Besides laws, I think what journalists also need to be trained in is intersectionality, looking at, gender crime not in isolation, but also looking at issues of caste and class and sexuality, disability, or other kinds of things which make people powerless. I think that's really important. And really, Hathras was a learning case that there's this fighting between the media saying it's caste, it's not caste, why are you bringing up caste, social media getting into that. And it's really important that we see, structural violence and these other categories as well. Very important. The media needs to train itself in that.
Thank you so much. Now, I don't think we have time for taking all the questions, but let me take the last question to Tara. And that is, Praveen Ratan says that, mainstream media reporting, social media, we've seen is irresponsible, manipulative, sensational reporting. Do you believe in this scenario that strict regulation needs to be imposed from the outside, or will self-regulation suffice?
Well, while I don't obviously advocate for a lawless society, and when I say lawless, I mean literally without laws, but I don't see a law and order approach to violence. I know we can talk about death penalty, which I disagree. It doesn't serve as a deterrent and is actually will actually cause an increase in rape and murder. We can talk about punishment and all of these different factors, but I actually have a prevention rather than cure approach to violence. And I often use this example, which is, if tomorrow someone comes to me and says, hey, you know what, you've got 24 hours, you can murder anyone you want to, I would probably say, thanks, but no thanks, not my morals. So I look at that example, and I'm sure a lot of people say, no, thank you, I won't murder someone, I don't think it's right. And I look at that and I say, look, it's not really about what will come after. We need our morals to be situated in the individual. And that comes from a cultural, reckoning, to bring up feminist sons, to change our society. And when I say bring up feminist sons, I obviously mean the parents, and everyone needs to be feminist. So I'm talking about re-envisioning society as a feminist one.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We've completely run out of time, but I thought it was a very good conversation. Sameera, Tara, and Vakasha, I think all of you all helped spotlight different facets of this particular idea of the role of the media, and something that we are all very concerned about. So thank you all for your participation, and I think I will now need to hand us over to Suruchi.
Yes, thank you so much for that much needed session. We hope the right people are listening and putting the learnings into action. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Tata Group. Even though we're almost coming to the end of the festival, we still have many sessions left. So please do head over to our website to check them out. At 7:15, we have Lockdown Learnings with Fareed Zakaria and Barkha Dutt. Hope to see you there.